Okay, welcome back. My name's Tom, and today we're going to be running through a series I like to call Unpacking That Gram, where I take random Instagrams from my account. If you're not following me, it's _Tom Noske. I take random Instagram photos and I show you how I went about editing them. So sometimes I post images that aren't super edited, but sometimes, like this image today, I post images that are super edited, and I want to give you guys an insight on how I went about editing those. This particular shot today is one of my favorite shots from 2018 for two reasons. The first is it's just a beautiful shot. It's an edit that I'd been wanting to pull off for a while but could never quite pull it off, and I feel like I did a pretty decent job at pulling it off with this edit here. It's also an image that you guys seem to really like, so you know, not that likes are everything, but it's sitting comfy at just over 10,000 likes, which is absolutely blows my mind that a single photo can get that many likes. The other thing as well is this was one of the first all-out composites that I'd posted on my Instagram account. It's one of the first times that I really got creative with Photoshop and just went all in. So I was really stoked with the response that you guys gave. And in a way, again, likes aren't everything, but it gave me the confidence to pursue compositing for the rest of this year. And now I'm at the point where almost every single one of my images is altered in some way to make it look better. And that's because you guys are giving me the confidence to really have a crack at that. So we're going to jump straight into it. So the first thing I'm going to do here to show you guys is I'm just going to disable all these layers. Not actually that many layers in the grand scheme of things, but the first thing I did here, this was the Lightroom edit. Now it's not a super complicated Lightroom edit. I would show you the sliders, but I've since reset that Lightroom edit, so this is the best that I can do. From memory, it was just dropping the clarity slider, adding a little bit of tone with the tone curve, changing the colors a little bit with the calibration tool just to bring the blues closer to turquoise and away from magenta, and then just playing around with the warmth. So obviously I shot this on a very overcast day, which again is another ideal point. If you want to make these sort of composites where you're turning it into a night sky, you want to pick your photos appropriately. Obviously you can't pick a photo that was taken in the middle of a bright sunny day. You got to pick a photo that was taken, you know, in circumstances like this where it might be a little bit overcast. Or alternatively, shoot in blue hour. So if you're shooting sunset, wait until just after the sun has dipped and take photos specifically for these sort of composites. Or if you're shooting sunrise, get up a little bit earlier and arrive there a little bit early and shoot some of the photos before the sun has risen. So that way it can give you a flat canvas to really go wild on this sort of creative edit. So we're gonna jump into it. The first thing I did obviously was replace the sky. So I'm gonna go ahead and enable these masks and turn this one off. And it's a pretty basic mask. All I did for this one was select and mask. So the select and mask tool is probably the easiest way to mask. A good reference for this is Peter McKinnon's video on scar replacements. I will be making my own scar replacement video, which will be covering my experience with scar replacements and the little things that I've added on top of this video. But if you want to see a really basic tips and tricks video on how to replace scars, Peter McKinnon's video is amazing. But for this one, all I did was, if I go ahead and disable these layers again, go back to the original, all I did was make sure I'm selected on the layer, head over to select, select and mask, and then I've just made sure I've clicked the top one, brought the opacity down a little bit so I can see what I'm doing, and then all I've done is painted across. Now this is a pretty basic one because the contrast between the foreground and the background is quite strong, so you don't need to worry too much about being precise. But obviously, depending on the image, you'll have to be more precise or less precise. So I'm going to enable these again. After that, I've combined the sky using two photos, and I'll chuck those here and here. These are two of my favorite, or this one here is one of my favorite that I use in a lot of my composites. I'll chuck up a couple examples here, even stuff that, you know, I've combined a few skies. And this galaxy shot that I've got here is just one that I use in most of my galaxy shots. So I'll alternate between a few, but I get all these images that I use if I don't shoot them myself from shutterstock.com. So once I've added those, I added 2 layers for that and 2 layers for the background. And all that did was I didn't want it to be a plain galaxy sky because I didn't think that matched too much. I wanted it to look like the sun. There was a little bit of color and burn in the sky still from either just before sunrise or just after sunset. So I wanted to make it look like the sun was only sitting on the horizon. So I've done that by adding a normal sky and then overlaid that with the galaxy shot. So that gives you that look of that glow on the horizon. It also makes it a lot easier to match. So it's quite hard to match just a galaxy shot to a foreground shot, I've found, unless it's the perfect conditions. After that, all I've done is added this. Now all this is if you've watched any of my other videos. So to do this, all you want to do is select Shift Alt Command N. It'll add a new layer. I've then turned this layer on to overlay. Sorry, not soft light. Overlay. I've then come over here to the paintbrush tool, selected a bright orange color, so closer to white than orange, but in the oranges. Put my opacity down to 25, and then all I've done is painted over the galaxy to sort of highlight it. I've also added some over the horizon and whatnot. So that's a neat little trick you can use to highlight your image. I tend to find that if you highlight your highlights and darken your shadows manually using dodging and burning or using that technique, it can add a lot of depth and a lot of emphasis to your image. The next part I've done is matched the foreground to the background. Now obviously right now it's looking nice and warm, but we do not want it to look warm. Obviously we want it to look like it's in the middle of the night or just before sunrise. So what I've done here is I've dropped, using the color balance tool, I have brought more blues and more magentas into my image, also as well as some cyans. Using the highlights not so much because I find it damages the image, but with the shadows and midtones, I've gone ahead and added more blues and more magentas and a little bit of cyan into my image, just to make it a little bit darker. The next steps, I have gone ahead and dropped the brightness to darken the whole image, and then I've dropped the brightness specifically on the foreground just to darken it a little bit more. And I'll show you how I brought that back out right now by doing the same thing as I've done before. Adding a new layer, turning it to overlay, grabbing my paintbrush tool, and then painting over the highlighted sections. So if I turn this one back on, turn this one off, that's the before, and that's the after. All it does is sort of highlights certain sections of your image rather than having the whole thing bright. I find that really helps for adding oomph to your images. If your highlights are brighter rather than the whole image being brighter, if your whole image is brighter, I tend to think it sucks away from the color without you having to add too much saturation. So this is a good technique to make your colors look like they pop without having them oversaturated. The next step I've done is added reflections. Now it's not too much. All I've done for this one, if you've watched any of my other videos, is I've taken a sample of all the background layers, duplicated and merged them, and then all I've done is headed over here to transform, flip vertical, and then this is a soft light layer. So all it is there. I'll show you the normal one. So yeah, again, I've painted away using a mask, and then I've turned it to a soft light layer. And all that done is matched the reflections a little bit closer to the color of the sky above. And then the last layer, all I've done is added a little bit of blue. Now that's the Photoshop file. Not a super complicated edit, but it looks great, and it's drastically different from the original image, which I think is what you guys really enjoyed about this photo. Seeing the before and after was so intense that it drew eyes to this image. So after this, all I've done is I've chucked it back into Lightroom, and again, the Lightroom edit is just as important as the Photoshop edit. This was the before on the Lightroom edit, and this was the after. So again, it's quite strong. So I've used 3 key tools for this Lightroom edit to create this look. I've used the camera calibration tool to create the color, which brought the magentas closer to turquoise and brought everything to more of a blue hue. I've used local adjustments, so the paintbrush tool and gradual filters to create the light emphasis. And then I've used the tone curve to soften those blacks and make it look more dreamy. So I'll show you that. The first one I'm going to show you is the camera calibration tool. Now, this is the before and after with that. So obviously that makes a huge difference to the image alone. So again, before and after. All it does is warms up the oranges a little bit more and brings those blues a little bit further away from magenta and closer to turquoise. And I really like that look for the color. So all I've done for that is I've brought the blue primaries closer to the left, and I've brought the red primaries closer to the right, and then played around with the green primaries depending on how the image looked, and then again played around with the saturation to make the image look a little bit more balanced. The next step for this is the tone curve. All I've done for this is I've brought down the midtones and then brought up the shadows, or brought up the blacks, and all that does is that softened the blacks. Again, if I show you the before and after here, again, not a massive step and not super important, but I thought it looked good for this image. And then the last part of this edit is, again, if you've watched any of my videos, local adjustments. So local adjustments are great for bringing emphasis to certain aspects of your image. The four that I've used here is I've used one on the horizon to create emphasis on that horizon and make it look like the sun is just coming up. And I've also brought attention to the middle of the image using this one and taken away from some of these shadows down the bottom. I've brought emphasis to me. Yep, that is me in the photo, by adding clarity and adding contrast. And then the other two are for light. So this one was to bring attention to the galaxy, and then this one was to create that nice looking shadow at the bottom of the image. So if I turn that off and then turn that on, that's probably the biggest part of it. And then the last part is just the local adjustments. So one of them was for the reflections, just to brighten them up a little bit. One of them was for the beach, again, just to brighten it up a little bit. And then one of them was for me, to bring attention to me. So that was my edit, and how I turned this boring image from a ugly morning in Byron Bay into this beautiful galaxy shot that I created using Photoshop and Lightroom. So if you've enjoyed this video, or if you've enjoyed any of the videos that I've been putting out, please hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, and head over to my Instagram, _Tom Noske. I'll chuck that up right there. And head over to this photo and leave some love if you haven't seen it before. If this is the first time you're meeting me, again, my name's Tom, and I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.